I'm I'm hearing that the movie is actually kind of good. Hello, I'm Joe, and this is Same Name, Different Game. Now you may have heard there's this movie in theaters now, starring The Rock, and it's based on a video game, but it's not based on a contemporary game and a long-running franchise like last year's awful Assassin's Creed. No, this is based on an older game, one considered by many to be a classic. Kaiju Crash 'em Up, Rampage. Now, I have not yet seen the film, but I'm hearing that it is surprisingly fun and watchable. As for the game, let's dive in with a little history. On the off chance you don't know, Rampage is a game released by Midway in 1986, which sees players take on the role of three giant monsters, smashing their way across the USA and Canada. It was developed by Brian Colin and Jeff Nauman, who would go on to develop sequels for Midway in the 90s and 2000s at the studio they opened in 1992, Game Refuge. Midway merged with competitor Williams in 1988, and in 1996 they acquired Atari Games, the former arcade division of, well, Atari, also known in the home market as Tengen. That same year, Williams spun Midway off with an IPO of Midway stock. Williams retained the vast majority of stock for about a year and a half, but in 1998, they sold the rest of their shares and Midway became properly separated from Williams. In the 90s, those salad days of the second arcade boom, the company did very well. But as arcades began to die in the 2000s, a series of poor decisions by Midway management, coupled with games that underperformed or were outright cancelled in development, led to Midway going bankrupt. Meanwhile, Warner, ever in and out of the games business, had been spinning up a game division once more, and in 2010, they acquired Midway for a scant $33 million, and along with it, the IP for just about all of their classic games. And that brings us to the Rampage movie. Now, Warner is known for a lot of things, but arguably they are best known as a film studio, so it's no surprise that they are making movies out of Midway properties. Still, why Rampage? I mean, it's not a particularly well-remembered game, and it doesn't give itself over any better to a film version than something like, I don't know, Sinistar or Defender. And, well, it's just me, but I do have to be honest with you folks, and I've never really cared that much for Rampage to begin with. And I will explain why as we take a look at our first game for this episode, Rampage in the Arcade, represented here by the Midway Arcade Treasures Collection. Rampage is a game with a premise that I absolutely love. Take control of one of three giant monsters and smash up city after city. But it's just so tedious, so repetitive, so bleh. This game has literally over 750 stages before resetting to stage 1, but you may as well reset to stage 1 immediately because so little changes from level to level. Yeah, the backgrounds are different and the buildings are slightly rearranged, but that's about it. You climb buildings, punching them every few pixels while getting shot at so frequently you can't possibly dodge, making it just about eating people for health faster than you take damage. There are 3 playable characters. George, a man turned into a King Kong-like ape by mega vitamins, Lizzie, a woman turned into a Godzilla-like lizard by a radioactive lake, and Ralph, a man turned into a giant wolf with no resemblance to any pre-1986 giant movie monster I can think of, by weird food additives. Unfortunately, none of these characters play differently at all. Speed, strength, jump height, it's all the same for all 3, and there are no special moves. The only thing that makes the arcade game fun for more than 5 minutes is the prospect of smashing everything up with 2 friends. It's weird to me that this game continues to be mentioned in the same breath as arcade classics like Defender and Joust and Spy Hunter, which was also almost a movie with The Rock. Anyways, this game just isn't that fun as far as I'm concerned, but one thing that I cannot throw shade at is its ability to make money. It definitely was profitable for Midway, probably at least in part due to the fact that a 3-player machine in 1986 was something of a novelty. And of course, that being the case, it was going to get home ports. All successful arcade games did, right? Right. So, we're going to take a look at the 2 big home ports, the first of which being the NES version. It's because of this port that I was even aware of this game during its time. It's also because of this port that I thought it was a Data East game for years. For the record, I also thought Spy Hunter, another Midway arcade classic, was a Sunsoft game for the same reason. But yes, it was Data East who was responsible for both porting and publishing the NES version of Rampage, released only in North America in 1988. Data East left Rampage considerably smaller than they found it. The number of stages is dropped to 128 before restarting. The number of simultaneous players is dropped to 2, and perhaps most noteworthy, the number of playable characters is also reduced to 2, with Ralph being eliminated from this version. The resolution and overall power of the NES was also greatly reduced when compared to Midway's arcade hardware, which leaves the graphics looking pretty rough in comparison, to say nothing of the lack of enemies on screen at any given time. This isn't the worst arcade port of the 1980s or anything like that, but the controls are a little slippery and the reduced enemy count makes it even more tedious than the arcade original. Add to that, you occasionally have to punch the same spot multiple times to either break the wall or pick up an item, and it makes this an easy one to skip. They added some kinda fun map screens and some new music, but it doesn't make the game worth playing, honestly. The best thing about this game is the box art. But wait, there's more. You see, while Nintendo was certainly running most of the 8-bit console world, Sega was doing quite alright with their Master System in Europe, so they made their own version of Rampage specifically for PAL markets. Though it did come to North America courtesy of, strangely enough, Activision. You heard me right. The game was made by Sega for PAL territories, and Activision decided to publish it stateside, even with the Master System getting shellacked by the NES here. And, well, it's kinda hard to fault them. This port is much, much better than Data East's effort. First of all, it keeps Ralph, but beyond that, it just looks so much better. Not quite as good as the arcade version, but closer than you might expect for home hardware of the era. Unfortunately, it seems like this 1988 release wasn't under the purview of Sega's A-Team, because it's got some weird issues. First and foremost, if you punch while you're too low on a building, you just get warped back to the ground. This is super annoying, and I really don't know how it passed a QC check. It also cuts even more stages. This game has less than half of the NES version, with a mere 50. It also doesn't have the numerous small towns of the other versions, instead putting you in 10 cities for 5 stages each, and look, if I can't destroy Peoria, what is even the point? One thing in this game's favor, though, is that it's the fastest of all the versions. Your walking and climbing speed is increased even from the arcade original, which does help a bit. And the Master System's increased horsepower when compared to the NES means it has almost as many enemies on screen at a time as the arcade. So if you, unlike me, are a fan of the arcade, check this one out. I'm sorry folks, I just don't love Rampage, but that is not going to stop me from doing like we always do, and taking a look and a listen to these side by side. It is indisputable that the arcade original looks best, and while the stage design doesn't do it for me, the folks at Midway in the 80s knew how to make a great looking game. The folks at Sega did a fine job with the aesthetics, and the folks at Data East didn't. Even by 1988 NES standards, this is pretty ugly. I mean, come on, that's the same year Super Mario Bros. 3 came out in Japan. And that makes it time to give the edge. And in case I haven't said it enough times yet, I don't really like Rampage that much, but I would definitely say that the arcade version is the way to go. Now, this is pretty readily available. It's on current gen hardware as part of the LEGO Dimensions Midway Arcade expansion. It's also available on prior generations of hardware in various compilations and that kind of thing. The ports are not very expensive, but neither one of them is really worth revisiting in my opinion. But if you do like the original game, I would say take a look at the Master System version. And that does it. I hope the movie is more fun than the game, and thank you so much for watching. I will see you next month with another episode. Same name, different game.